Okay, right. Hi, this is Matt Kendall, and I'm an IEMT practitioner and an IEMT trainer. And today I'm joined by Andy Austin, who actually developed the whole IEMT model. And I get asked lots of questions about IEMT because I do train practitioners, and I obviously do speak about it quite a lot as well on stages up and down the country, it seems now. And I get asked the same questions, and to be honest, I also have these same questions as well. So I thought the best thing to do is go to source, speak with Andy himself, and try and get some answers from this. So, Andrew, good. It's 9 a.m. in the morning, quite a dour morning in October. How is it down south? Are you still down south in Sussex?
I am in down south, and the sun is shining in my heart, but it is dark and wet and wintry outside.
Well, it's like that whatever the weather is for me.
But it's good to be here, Matt. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you very much for joining us. So IEMT, it's getting more and more notoriety, more and more. In fact, you know what? Quite a lot of people have just contacted me on LinkedIn and Facebook saying I've heard about this IEMT thing, and I'm seeing it sort of crop up more and more. And I've been a massive fan of IEMT. I tell people about this all the time. You know, the first instance I heard about this, it must have been about 10 years ago, and I actually met somebody online who was doing another therapy type, because I used to do hypnosis mainly, and he was in Brighton, and I was living in Manchester, and I went down to see him. We're just going to do some work on each other. You know what hypnotists are like. And he said, I'm going to an afternoon training. It's just like a little workshop. It's like 20, 30 quid by a guy called Andrew Austin. And I Googled your name, and it had some interesting results. And I was like, okay, what is this? And he said, oh, it's something to do with stopping negative memories and intrusive thoughts and stuff. He goes, it's just like an experimental workshop. Now, I've been to a lot of trainings and stuff in the past, and I thought, it sounds, I don't know, it sounds a bit far-fetched, the actual results of what, basically I think you were saying, it helps you to pull yourself out of a memory and stuff. And I just thought, it just sounds a little bit, And I went along, and there was about 12 of us in a tiny little room in somewhere, like a tiny little sort of, and you said basically, this isn't a practitioner course, this is just an introduction to what I might do later on. And I think it must have been one of the very first things, that you did. And I can remember you said, all right, pick a memory. There's no explanation. Pick a memory, get somebody to move your eyes. And I remember it was that moment, and I thought, actually, a lot of my work is going to now change. The way that I approach therapy or working with people, and the results I can get. It was in that moment when, because it was literally a memory from when I was about 10 or 11 years old. Something that somebody said to me, one of my family members said to me, that was it was a stupid thing, but I helped, it meant a lot to me. And I can remember when we did the eye movements, it was like zooming out from the memory, and I was like, whoa. And then you basically flipped over like a chart, and you said, I'm expecting these outcomes. And it matched, and it wasn't just vague outcomes, it was very specific. And I just thought, oh, there's something in this. There's something in this. And I later on came back and did the practitioner training. And I then, a year or so later, came back and did the the practitioner trainers training. And I've used this extensively with my clients now, and generated results that are just amazing, just amazing results. And the people who I train are also, reporting similar things. So basically, first of all, IEMT, in layman's terms, what is it, and how on earth did you come up with this technique?
Well, as you accurately described, it's a process that uses eye movements to create some significant changes in the way we structure certain thought processes and ways that we think. Now, how this came about, it's a long and convoluted story, which is going to be slightly different every time I tell it, because there are so many different things I could mention. But there were two key events that happened. I was already loosely aware of EMDR. Now, this is really the archetypal way of using eye movements to create therapeutic change. Now, as I was aware of it, I hadn't done any training. I had some ideas about how this thing, what it looked like. I was testing this out with people. And what I noticed is that for some people, when it worked, it was astonishing. People with some really quite horrible background experiences and traumatic experiences, who through really just one and maybe 2 sessions were finding it transformative. They were waking up, one person said. Somebody said, it's like my brain has been switched back on. I'm alive again. It was phenomenal. But it didn't work all the time. And that bothered me, because I wanted to know, okay, there's a qualitative difference between when it works and when it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I started collating that data. The first observation was this: it didn't work when it's an anticipatory problem. It only worked when it's a retrospective problem. So I thought, okay, start my list. Time. Time orientation makes a significant impact on when this works. Now, around about this time, I was also working in neurosurgery at Southampton General Hospital. And I got to work with some of the best clinicians I could ever imagine meeting. One of the surgeons, I was with him during an assessment of a preoperative patient, and he's got a pen, and he's moving it around to look for convergence and divergence of the way the eyes focus, because we've got a number of axes by which we focus the eyes. And what they're looking for is divergences in order to complete the neurological assessment. During the assessment, the surgeon is moving his pen around, the patient's lying on his back, following the pen. And I noticed a little flicker, a tiny little movement. And I asked the surgeon later on, what is that little movement that we see? And he said, it's nothing, it's just an artifact. What that translates to is these movements don't have any relevancy to the process that we're doing here. Now, the next day or maybe the day after, in the same situation again, the same surgeon, we're doing the same assessment, or he's doing the same assessment, I'm just there observing, and the eyes did the same motion again. And I said to the patient, what just happened? And he said, oh, I'm sorry, my mind just wandered off. He literally, that little movement was when he went from paying attention to what he's looking at to thinking about something else. And he apologized for it. I thought, aha, second thing on the list. When we have this funny little eye movement, the mind changes and they go to something else. So I thought, what happens if I can reproduce that little movement during what I was doing as EMDR in my very prototypal, ignorant way? And I started to then calibrate some things from there. So that was how it began. I then started testing this out as you came along to in the experimental workshops, where I was traveling all around the UK, really, just running these little events and just testing out what was happening with people and then getting the data. And then from there, of course, I was able to observe what was happening, and it started to build together. What I subsequently found was this. I discovered a whole load of stuff that was already discovered. And so as I then started knowing what I'm looking at, then looking at the literature, I discovered actually a lot of this stuff is well documented, and that I'm just rediscovering things that are already very well known. Now, from there, of course, we then go into the IEMT algorithms, which are mine. I haven't found those reproduced anywhere else, apart from the people reproducing the IEMT stuff. And then we have the actual application for that. So that's my sort of very quick potted history.
I think just for people who are completely new to this, IEMT, EMDR, what do they both mean, and what are the main? That's the question I get asked all the time.
EMDR is a memory-based therapy that utilizes eye movements.
So essentially, it's emotional
eye movement
desensitization,
reprocessing. Developed by Francine Shapiro. There's a degree of controversy as to the origin of the idea that Francine then developed.
Yeah.
But I'll leave that for people to look at. She then made it a medical-only, qualified psychologist-only training, and it became very quickly established within the medical psychiatry realm. And so it's now sort of leaked out into the mainstream, and all sorts of people now are training and doing EMDR.
Yeah.
essentially it is think about past event and move the eyes.
Yeah.
And then they have lots of philosophical things they attach to that. Now, IEMT is profoundly different, even though to the layman it looks the same. This is integral eye movement therapy. If there's one thing I could go back in time and change, it would be the name. Because I didn't know, just to give you a bit of history here, I was originally calling it eye movement integration.
Right.
Now, I thought I'd come up with that name.
That's already exists, isn't it?
It already exists,
yes,
but me being a half-wit hadn't actually paid attention. I didn't do the due diligence and actually start looking these things up. So that's what I was calling the early work.
Right.
Eventually, I got in contact with Steve Andreas about this, and he said, "Oh no, that was ours. We came up with that name and trademarked it." I was like, "I have no idea. I'd known Steve and Connery for years at that point."
Yeah. So
this was like, oh. So then I had to come up with a new name, and discussions with my good friend and colleague Nick Kemp. We came up with IEMT.
Yeah.
You see, it gets so confusing.
Yeah.
The name, I wish I had done a different name, but it's done and dusted now. It's out there. So now EMDR is think about the memory, move the eyes. IEMT is different because instead of working predominantly on memory, we're working kinesthetically. We're looking at how do you remember what to feel. And so essentially the opening point in an IEMT session is what is the problem feeling? So we don't presuppose that you must have a hidden trauma. We're just going to start off with the kinesthetic, and then we're going to map that back to how did you learn to feel the way that you feel?
Yeah.
Which may or may not be traumatizing, of course, or traumatic. It might just be routine life experiences that have taught you to feel this way. So we're working predominantly with problematic emotions. From the experimental workshops, I was then able to develop the identity work. And this came through exposure to David Grove, who unfortunately has died since, where he was doing some work around identity and the use of pronouns. And I immediately could see how that could be incorporated into the IEMT algorithms. And then that then gave me the formalized training. At that point, I had enough material to put together for the training course.
Wow. And now I think we have to say as well that IEMT works on, the way that it works is basically if somebody feels a fear or anxious or something, what we do is basically a form of regression. It's how well do you know this feeling, and when was the first time you can remember feeling this way, and it takes you back to the initial sensitizing event or the first time you can remember feeling that way. But it also does work on just memory alone, doesn't it? On just if they have just a negative memory, you can just do directly on that memory.
Yeah, we can take a traumatic memory, think about the memory, move your eyes, and then essentially we're just doing EMDR.
Yes.
The fundamental difference between the two are the treatment algorithms that we apply the eye movements to.
Yeah.
The treatment algorithms of EMDR are significantly different to the IEMT ones. They go into completely different domains of experience.
Yeah.
Essentially what we can say is you can take any traumatic memory, think about the memory and move your eyes out to the peripheries repeatedly. The chances are very high you'll get a good result.
Yes.
If not, both models have a way of calibrating to make sure that you do.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's worth saying that EMDR is typically going from left to right, and you can even see, I've seen like light bars, almost like thing on the front of Knight Rider, it goes from left to right, and also I've seen many apps, and it's binaural tones that go from left to right. I've seen people tapping from left to right.
I think it's probably quite important at this point to mention what's happened with the EMDR. You have the original model that was developed and taught by Francine Shapiro.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have everyone jumping onto the EMDR bandwagon, bringing their own ideas and their own concepts.
Yes.
So now EMDR is no longer a specific set of treatment protocols.
Okay.
Because when somebody else wrote, and I then put onto the website, what are the differences between EMDR and IEMT?
Mm-hmm.
That was written by an EMDR trainer who attended one of the IEMT courses. So I asked her, can you elicit the differences between the two so I can put a description? Since I posted that, I get endless emails from EMDR practitioners telling me how incorrect it is. And it appears that what's happened is you've got the original EMDR, and then it's branched out into these different lineages as people have introduced these different concepts and are calling those concepts EMDR. We've seen a similar thing with, say, Ericksonian hypnosis. I see Ericksonian hypnotists doing everything that's not Ericksonian.
Yeah.
And I see NLPers doing a load of stuff. I mean, I've just sat through watching some videos somebody sent me of an NLP training, and I did not see a single piece of NLP, as I understand it to be. And my background being with Bandler, I didn't see any NLP whatsoever. But those people attending the training don't know that. Now they're going away, taking that stuff as, oh, that's NLP. They now reproduce it, and you can see how it goes. And I think that's what's happened with the EMDR, which is what I'm very keen to try and avoid doing with IEMT.
Yeah, because I know with the EMDR, because I read, I think it was the original book actually that Francine Shapiro wrote, and from what I noticed, some of the key differences that it was a lot to do about belief systems, and also with the EMDR is basically it's to do with, I think they call it a flow of consciousness or a flow of memory. So basically, you think of the memory, you move it from left to right, and you allow the memory to flow. With IEMT, you tend to, with the simple pattern especially, you get them to hold on to that memory for as long as they can as well. You're challenging them to hold on to that memory. And also with IEMT, when we say algorithms, it's just simply how we move the eyes. So with EMDR, like I say, it's traditionally just left to right. With IEMT, we go to the different quadrants, we call it. Can you explain why and how you developed, you went from basically from side to side to actually going up to the corners, to the periphery of the quadrants as well?
Well, this is where, and I don't want to go into the content of the training because we're the technical bits. But essentially, this is where that observation that's first started in the neurosurgical department about that little movement of the eye, essentially, if that little movement doesn't happen, the change doesn't happen. So the variance of the movements was to identify where does that eye movement occur, because that's what we're trying to stimulate. There's a direct correlation between therapeutic effect and that little thing that we call an axis deviation.
Yes.
You can call it what you like, of course. That was just the name I came up with at the time. And it might well be that a single movement in one particular direction simply doesn't work. Because there's no axis deviation occurring. And this is the story I used to tell the practitioner, which was I was in a psychiatric clinic where they were doing EMDR, and they did exactly the thing you described, which is it's like a Knight Rider light going backwards and forwards. The psychiatrist wasn't even in the room.
Yeah.
He positioned the client, the patient, who themselves was a bloody doctor, in the room with this light going backwards and forwards, and he left the room, and nothing was happening. And this particular patient was on there, I don't know, it was a lot of sessions in, and was not getting any benefit. I changed the angle of the box. Well, then instantly we got an effect.
Wow.
Now, I got in trouble. I mean, that didn't go down very well. That was me now no longer welcome in that area again. But the observation for me then was proven that, okay, we have to introduce variables when things don't work. Yeah. Shocking, I know, but in the world of psychiatry and mental health, this is something that doesn't happen.
Wow.
We just keep doing the same thing because we have to do it correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. So my clients have a range of different issues that come to see me with. Generalized anxiety, or basically what they class as general anxiety, low self-esteem. I think you put it best. I heard you do a talk, general dissatisfaction with life. I get an awful lot of. And what's quite interesting as well, when people don't have anything bad to feel bad about, they feel guilty about feeling bad, because they have all this thing. There's a lot in this, like the self-development world. No matter how bad your life is, somebody dreams about being where you are, kind of mentality. And so because they're not happy, they feel guilty that they didn't have a traumatic childhood, that they're not living on the streets, they have food, but they're not happy. So that makes them feel guilty, and it's kind of like a perpetuating cycle in that sense. So I get an awful lot of that. I've had people who've been through specific traumatic experiences, I've just recently uploaded one onto my YouTube channel where a woman got told she had terminal cancer when she didn't, and what that was like for her and the family. And lots of fears and phobias, all different kinds of things. When you're working with clients or when you're using IEMT and sort of seeing IEMT being used, where do you think it fits in best with therapy? What kind of things do you think it works? I don't like using the word treats because then I think we're getting to sort of a medical kind of diagnostic area. But what do you think IEMT really works best on? What kind of issues?
It tends to work in the areas where life has done things to the person.
Yes.
See, people's problems go in one of two ways, and I think most problem has a bit of both. It's just on where they are on the continuum.
Yeah.
Life can screw me up, or I can be screwing my life up.
Yeah.
And most of us have it's one or the other, or bits of both simultaneously to different percentages. So it's where basically life has screwed the person up. Because largely we're dealing with retrospective historical aspects, which we can't actually change. We can't change the history, but we can influence what a person does in the future. So IEMT is predominantly for when life has not dealt you the hand that you really would have benefited from having, and in fact it gave you all these problems. That for me is the number one thing. There are generative components with the identity work. And that's the stuff that gets taught usually on the second day. But largely it's remedial work.
Okay, so basically when people have been through incidences, traumatic or not, basically when they've actually, when something's kind of happened to them. And I often get this, I'm not that kind of person because I can't do that because when I was younger, X, Y, Z, and I often find it works very well on that. I can no longer do this. In fact, an interesting case is that this guy who I worked with, he was a friend of mine actually, and I just did a little bit of help with him. He can't eat roast lamb because when he was at school, he suffered a burn, and his burning skin, it was in like a technology, this was before health and safety, his burning skin smelt to him like roast lamb. And so what happened when he was then being triggered whenever he smelt roast lamb to that painful memory. So, and I think the mind sort of creates these barriers and blocks, and it gets more sensitive over time to the point where that's just how you live your life. And so we went back and did some work on that. And then since then, he has been able to eat roast lamb. And what I find really interesting about the work which I used to do with hypnosis and some NLP and IEMT is that hypnosis and a lot of NLP, when I talk about NLP, I'm talking more about the broadly whoop whoop, Anthony Robbins, walk on hot coals, pump the air. If you're wanting to do something, let's just make it simple. Let's say like go for a job interview, right? And people feel anxious about the job interview. With IEMT, I'd be very much looking at what's the issue with the feeling of the interview and regressing that and working on those memories, and also working some identity work around the interview with that person and that kind of thing. With a lot of sensational therapy and NLP and other stuff, it's really go in there, boss it, and really pumping up emotion. And I find that IEMT is much more to do with the lack of emotion, to reduce the emotion as opposed to pumping up emotion. So I think that if you're pumping up emotion, increases your blood pressure, your heart rate, and increases everything. And if it goes wrong, it's going to go wrong at a much higher level than if it doesn't. So I often find this, I try to describe this with people, as I always say, it's a bit like the bullet train in Japan. It's like, if you have a normal train and you're trying to push it, if you have a bullet train, which is like levitated by a quarter inch, where it has much less friction, the same amount of effort, you'll go much, much further because there's much less friction. So I often find with people who I use IEMT with, they don't feel confident. They feel more naturally confident because it's the lack of, it's the lack of other negative feelings. And that's how I try and describe it.
Yeah, anything that has a kinesthetic representation, so anything with a emotional representation we can apply the basic pattern in IEMT to that. Now, some of those emotions will be inhibitory and anticipatory. So I think about going to work on a Monday morning and I get that horrible Monday morning feeling.
Yeah.
Now, it might well be that person needs to change their job and it's not a therapeutic.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it might well be, it won't matter what they do. They've always had this feeling. In which case, even though it's an anticipatory thing, we can work with that quite effectively. And by removing that feeling, or as you say, reducing it down significantly, what that person can then think about that Monday morning situation slightly differently and be in a better position to do something about it rather than working reactively.
Yes.
I like your idea of the adding other states to it that we see in other therapies. And I've seen those things you say about when it goes wrong at a higher level. I've seen a lot of those casualties. And largely it was why I moved away from the previous sort of personal development scenes that I was involved in. Because I started this in 1994 when I first started training in Ericksonian hypnotherapy. So over the years, I've had the chance to see all the people come and go. And I've also been able to track a lot of people who were in the scene in the very early days. Some of those people who've gone on to have successful lives and be, functional, happy individuals. Yeah. They're not involved in those scenes anymore. The people who have stayed in it, my goodness. So I've seen some interesting burnouts of people over the years, and the drug and alcohol and stuff like that. Yeah. Which started making me question, okay, what are the consequences of all this stuff? Yeah. Essentially, people feel less negativity with the IEMT stuff. Yeah. It's not that they're having to become something they're not, to be, as you say, pumped up and hyped up. I'm a success. And
affirmations and all that. Yeah, no, I'm very much against that, the sense that, I think that this need for greatness and power is really born out of insecurity. And so a real great question that I love asking is like, okay, when you are pumped up, what does that allow you to feel? But more important, what does that allow you to avoid feeling? And then when you get the feeling they're avoiding, that's when I then regress that and do that with the IEMT. And I find that produces really good results.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So basically, because people do an action, they will pump themselves up. So it's like, why? Why do you need to feel this way? Because I believe confidence is not from psyching. I think psyching yourself up is good if you have to take a penalty or, lift a car because it's run over a child or something, but not for a long-term approach to life.
Yeah.
And I think that I've seen so many workshops and so many where they're taking quite damaged and broken people and telling them that they can be great. There's this whole thing of, there's this person online who's on my Facebook all the time, and I see this thing all the time going, okay is not enough. I thought, well, it is, because it's okay. It doesn't even
most damaged people, most people generally, all they need to do is be ordinary. They need to normalize their behaviors into a normal set of ordinary behaviors and emotions. All this, but it's easy to sell a hyped up thing. And that's
and it's and you and I both know, because I've worked behind the scenes and things like this before, and I think a really good example, let's just say there's a documentary on a streaming service at the moment from a very well-known person who claims not to be a guru, and some of the work that I see him doing with people is just like, how is this allowed? How is this, when people are treating people with quite severe anxiety disorders and pumping them up to the point, I would hate to see the actual long-term effects of what that's causing to a lot of these people. And when I meet these people at networking events, when they're so adamant to show you how powerful they are, they try and crush you, they try and NLP you. I see this an awful lot, and that's why I try and distance myself from the hypey crowd. I don't like anything to do with hype. Again, I think it's quite damaging in the long term. So let me ask you, so IEMT is growing, you must be happy with how it's developed and how many people are now involved, and you've done, is it 2 trainer trainings you've done now?
I've done 2. I'm not planning on any more anytime soon.
Okay.
The last thing I want to do is flood the world with IEMT trainers.
Yeah,
It's the last thing the existing trainers want or need, and it's also the last thing the world needs. I've seen what's happened in other fields, related fields, where they have flooded. Essentially, you run out of people to train as practitioners, so you teach them the master level, the advanced level, then you teach them the next level, and eventually you make them master, meta master, mega master, grand universal, imperial wizardly master. It's just an ever-escalating thing of marketing. So I'm very keen to try and avoid the difficulties that I've seen emerge from parallel fields.
So what would you like to see? In fact, I just read recently on the Facebook group that this is now being introduced in Delhi.
Right, we've got, in the prison project is something I proposed quite a few years ago now, and it's beginning to come to fruition. We've got Alan Johnson, who's up in the north of England, who has done a lot of work with the police and prison service and various other people. So we've had a lot of people working in the custodial services who have trained in these areas as well. And we also had a lot of personnel from all sorts of areas attend training courses over the years. The Tihar jail is one of the largest jails in the world. I think it's the 3rd largest jail in Asia, or the Southern Hemisphere, or something like that. Northern Hemisphere.
It's a big place. Yeah.
It's big.
Yeah.
Now, and Tihar have been working extremely hard in making progress to being much more rehabilitation orientated, and have had a lot more progressive values in that there's the punishment element, but also they recognize that an awful lot of their people that they've got locked up are there for crimes of poverty and from lack of education and social inequalities. They're running an enormous number of programs in the jail complex, educating and training and business stuff. There's loads of stuff happening. So I approached them and said, would you be interested in having a look at IEMT? And they have said, yes, we'll be interested in having a look at IEMT. So we're going over, there's 3 of us going over to Delhi in December of this year, where we're going to do it's just a 1-day pilot. The idea is, the idea is this: how will these ideas be received by the staff who are working within the system? Because ultimately it's the staff who are going to be overseeing it. What I'd like to have happen is this: because we're going to have an awful lot of long-term, if not lifer, prisoners there, we find the correct individuals who are willing and able. They may be running therapy services already, counselling services, as you often find within prisons, where you've got long-term inmates, inmates helping inmates. And we set up a training program that the inmates themselves are then running in IEMT. Right. So it is part of the educational system, educational programs that the jail administration are running for their inmates. That's the plan.
No.
We yet to see what actually happens. I suspect it will go well, but who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
I'm incredibly grateful to the administration for being open to this.
Of course. And where else do you see IEMT developing? What would you like to see it develop? Would you like to see people do PhDs and doctorates? And
that would be. I mean, that'd be huge. I mean, it would further my name, of course, because my name is going to be attached to it in terms of the developer of this field. There's a lot of people doing research and bits and pieces already. So the quality of life issues that are presented to therapy, the typical stuff as you reference, which is the trauma, the anxiety, the depression, the disorders of emotion and disorders of modern living, is our standard fare within therapy. But interesting things are beginning to emerge. So, for example, some of the practitioners and trainers have been looking at things like psoriasis.
Yes.
Now, how possibly would moving your eyes around improve what is a dermatological condition? And yet it appears to do so for some of the people some of the time, to an extraordinary degree. So some of these people are free from what is really a majorly debilitating, socially debilitating problem. So that's just been written up.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
I've not been involved in this. This has been done. This is work of other people, and they've done fantastic. Other areas that people are looking at, things like tinnitus, does show a lot of promise. Pain. So there's a whole load of areas that these are not areas I've used this with extensively. I've had, occasionally. So all sorts of new things are emerging. And this is what I like to see, is other people being creative with this and seeing what are the possibilities.
Just out of interest, so I've seen this psoriasis thing happen. I've seen it a few times on the Facebook groups. The way that they do it, is it to do with the feelings about having the issue?
The treatment protocol, the protocols we were originally using, and although I think these things have kind of changed a little bit in application, is all on the website. And the research paper that's been published is actually more of a case study paper that's been published in a peer-reviewed academic journal, which is amazing.
Brilliant.
That's on the IEMT website. So if people go to the blog, it's the most recent entry on the blog there.
Okay, I'll link to that as well in the notes here. No, that'd be interesting. So I think that with psoriasis, it can be a very embarrassing kind of thing. It'd be quite interesting to see how they use it, which patterns or which algorithms.
The best part about it, things like psoriasis, it's measurable.
Yeah.
Merely feeling better. It's very hard to make an attribution okay, so you wiggled your finger in front of their face and they moved their eyes, and use some incantations, and the person feels better, but then that could be placebo. So it's very hard to quantify what is not visible in terms of internal change. Things like psoriasis are very measurable and very demonstrable. And so that's what makes it quite a nice thing to actually be looking at, because of those very reasons.
Excellent. I'll just finish on sort of one thing. This has been fascinating. The way that I'm sort of moving things now, I like teaching IEMT to people who are practitioners of some description, whether they be a coach or a therapist. So far on my training courses I've had psychotherapists, I've had psychiatrists, I've had several EMDR practitioners. In fact, what I've had the EMDR practitioners report is that it seems to be much faster than a typical EMDR structure and protocol, where an EMDR protocol might be 6 weeks. IEMT's, what's the problem?
If I can just chip in on this one, I just have to just put it out there for people. I've had a number of EMDR people come to the training. Every single one of them has said how much better it was.
Wow.
Which I find very flattering and reassuring.
Yeah.
I've never had an EMDR person turn up at any training, mine or something that someone else is running, and say, I knew all this. They all say it's new material, so it's not EMDR. And they all say, I'm a convert, or worse than that.
Wow. I've actually got, hopefully on my next one, I'm going to have a neuroscientist and a GP. Now, the way that I do my training courses, it's for 2 levels. Essentially, some people want to come along and just want to learn about IEMT and basically have a weekend of self-development, which is fine. And they have no intention of working with their own clients. They just want to, work on themselves, which I completely understand. And then we have people who are working the self-development or therapeutic or medical areas. And that's where I really want to take it, because I think that you said it best when I first started doing this. IEMT is a tool that works with most of the people most of the time. It's not EFT, which claims to work with everything all of the time, or it's not, something like crystal therapy that claims to have all these things. In fact, IEMT doesn't make any form of claim whatsoever. It's just basically, this is something which might help. And I really like the way of doing that, because it's, I think that all therapists, or a lot of therapists, should have IEMT as a tool in their resource kit to use when traditional counseling or whatever it is they're doing doesn't seem to be working. And I think it works brilliantly in coaching, because coaching is very much about moving people from A to B, whether it be in a relationship or a job or something. And IEMT works very well with anticipatory. So basically things that are coming up, you then minimize that. So, like I say, with the bullet trains, you can go forward much better. So I find that I get a lot of coaches, especially relationship coaches, which I find, because when people have come out of a divorce, or they've been cheated on or something like that, they then have a lot of trust issues. and they're carrying this baggage, and they're seeing prospective partners through the filters of their past partners, which weirdly tends to create and drive that behavior in somebody new. With IEMT, the way that I sort of try and describe it, it's kind of like people think, they said, is it advanced learning? I said, no, it's almost unlearning rather than learning. It's almost unlearning, in the way that when you begin to clear this, when you begin to clear your association with experiences of the past, it's like, I'm looking out of a window now. If my window was dirty, everything looks dirty, but it doesn't mean that's dirty. If you clean the window, if you clean the filter, you can see things much better. So the way I try to explain it to people is that when you do IEMT on a situation, people can then see that situation for the information that's presented in the present, and not because of your association with that situation in the past. So you can make better informed decisions. And when you make better informed decisions, your life will take a different trajectory without you trying to force that choice. You just start making better choices. And so the way I want to see this sort of going now is a lot more therapists, because in my background was hypnotherapy. I do very little hypnotherapy these days. I do a lot of IEMT. I do some metaphor work, but it's mainly IEMT. But I would really like to see a lot more people who are in like the clinical fields, the medical fields. Even I've even had dentists come onto the course and said they've had great results, and doctors, when people have fear of needles and stuff like this, and they'll be able to do something in the session to be able to alleviate that. So yeah, I think it's a really great tool that can be used in a wide variety of different practices.
Yeah, I have a suspicion that somebody with no therapeutic training or background doing a 2-day IEMT course, if they're doing it correctly, so they've learned the material, they practice it for a little bit, I have a suspicion they would be able to achieve more change for people with problems than, say, somebody with a 7-year degree and then clinical training post-grad would be able to achieve. We have had, when I was first using this I'd formalized the protocols and all the rest. I was having people that had been in therapy for a very long time. And in one session was dealing with stuff that they were like, God, I've been talking about this for like 5 years. And I now can see it's not, what it is. Around about the time I began to formalize this, I have to just give this little anecdote. I was asked to a dinner party. Now, those that know me know that dinner parties are me and just general sort of social stuff. I'm fairly reclusive. So to go to this dinner party, I was like, oh, God. Now, there wasn't that many people at this dinner party, but the whole thing was to introduce me to this particular person who apparently we would be really good for each other professionally. Now, this person turned out to be a psychoanalyst of the traditional school.
Yeah.
And she was a lot older than myself and clearly had a lot of money. She was the neighbor of the person who'd invited me to the dinner party, who they lived in a 4-floor townhouse in the center of London. So we're talking quite a lot of money. And her pretty much opening gambit to me in the conversation was, so Andrew, how many clients do you have? And I couldn't really answer that question because, like, what do you mean, how many clients do I have? Because I don't have, like, I have 1 client or I have 100. I just work with people once or twice, and they maybe come back a few years later if they want other stuff. So I tried to explain that to her, and she didn't really understand what I meant. And I said, okay, can I just flip that question back? How many clients do you have? Oh, just the 5. And I said, well, when you say just the 5, is that 5 a day, 5 a week? No, 5. And her entire professional career as an analyst at this point was about 20 years. She had only had 5 clients for that full duration. Now, I've heard these stories. I've read these things I've heard other people tell that. I didn't realize those things were real, that there really were therapists out there who had clients in therapy for like 20 years. She's living entirely off the back of the income of 5 people. Who are seeing her for however many sessions a week. That's long therapy. And then when psychology comes in, does brief therapy, which may be 25 sessions or whatever, I have a little suspicion we can dispense with all of that. All of that stuff, that psychotheology, as Bandler and Grinder called it, is all very good for those community of people that like to study those things. But in terms of change work, I'm not convinced that most of the educational process that goes on is teaching people how to do change work. It's teaching people how to be the social role of that job title they've been given, how to fit into those conferences and that kind of stuff. It's not actually about, okay, this is what we can do with those other people.
Yeah, I've actually worked with people who are currently seeing a counsellor or a CBT therapist or something else. And I've always said, look, if you want me to speak with them, if you give permission to both them, myself, I will. I'm very, very happy for them to give me a call, or I can send them some notes on what we have done, to work with them. Because I find some therapists are very guarded and like, no, this is my structure and I'm very much open to.
I don't want you undoing the work that I've been doing with this person for the last 4 years.
I've had people contact me and say, what have you done to this person? Because they've shown significant change where they're wanting to now go out and do things. So I worked with this guy who got divorced about 15 years ago, and he hasn't been out and met anybody since. And all he does every week, he talks to his counsellor about his divorce and how that really, how it's affected him. So we did some work around the divorce, and I think that we won't go into it, but the post-traumatic stress disorder, the actual model that you use in IEMT, it gets it down to the real crux of the actual. We did some work on that, and he was laughing about his divorce after a while. In fact, he was annoyed at himself for not doing anything for so long. And he started going out and be more sociable. In fact, he wanted to move one of his therapy sessions because he was going to plan to go away. And the other therapist didn't like it because the client is beginning to change and he wanted to go out and explore things. And what the therapist wanted was him in the room every week to talk about the past. They didn't want to talk about the future. You just wanted to talk about the past continually. And this guy goes, I've talked about the past for years. I want to go out and do things. And I've actually worked with many people, and I've worked in combination with, I think counselling, some people need counselling, and I'm not trying to belittle it in any way. But some people just want to change. They don't want to, and I think that there's a large stigma around therapy still, especially in the UK. In America, I know it's like a badge of honour, but in the UK, people don't want to be seen as going for therapy. And so I always say, I only see people twice usually. And if I can't help you in a couple of sessions, then this is not the right way to go anyway.
Yeah, I've had 3 occasions where I've had people contact me because of my outspoken nature generally about therapy and psychiatry. I've had 3 occasions where clients or people have contacted me to ask me, can you help me break up with my therapist? Because they're frightened to do so.
Yeah.
Because whenever they try and make any social move or even linguistic move in an encounter, they're out manipulated by the coach or the therapist, and they don't know how to break up with them to stop. Like that, I don't think that's a healthy relationship.
I've had this. I can't stop going because I've been going for a year, kind of mentality, and I'm absolutely. And this is why when people go, I always say to people, look, you see me twice because I like to see how things develop, in between the sessions. And then on the second, so the first session, we break everything up. We smash it all up, basically. That's the heavy session. You go out, enjoy your life for a week. And then the week later, I always do a session 7 to 10 days after the first. And I always make sure I book 2 sessions in at the beginning, because if not, it's impossible to get hold of people and it goes on and on. But I like to calibrate the change. And then it's basically, somebody put it brilliantly, you can't clean into the sofa till you get the sofa out the way, because it often presents new problems now they're going out or whatever it might be. So you do like a refresher session. And then if people need a refresher session of some kind, they get in contact and come on for a single session, and that's it. I find it quite interesting how some therapists go, well, this is going to take 12 sessions, or this is going to take a year of work. And it's like, well, how do you know it's going to take a year of work? And what happens if people show significant change in 3 weeks? Are you still going to then see them for the 12? And it's so I do find
bills to pay.
I generally find that I do find that yeah, it's almost IEMT as a business model. You're always looking for new. But the way that I found, because the results are so dramatic in many cases, that I don't have a website. I haven't had a website in years. It's all referral, because when you see somebody change, it's like, well, what's happened there? And then so I'm currently working with somebody who is the wife of a man who was sat next to a client who I worked with on a plane recently, and he was talking about how I helped him with IEMT, and they've had to seek me out through many different ways. And I think that that's amazing when something like that actually happens. It is a very strong referral basis, but I love IEMT. I love the application of it. I love how the results it gets for people, people with anxiety. We haven't talked much about that because it's if people don't know, it's a 2-day training. The first day is very much about the patterns of IEMT, or the way that I teach it. The first day is about the patterns and the structure, the 3 pillars. The second day is much more about PTSD and the identity work. We haven't even really gone into the identity work, parts of it, and then also the psychological access and the actual physical things as well. So it is a complete model in itself. So people can, if people are wanting to get into therapy, doing an IEMT course, and then what you do is you do the IEMT course, and then you do a few case studies which you submit, and then you can join the association, is enough to actually work with, especially if you're a coach. And it's good if you're doing it, if you're a coach as well. But I think that every therapist should have this as something in their toolkit, just because it just creates such profound change in people. So thank you for creating it.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you very much. This has been great. And I think we've been through everything, the difference between this and EMDR, where it came from, where it's going, its uses. Do you have anything else that you want to tell the people who are listening to this? Yeah,
I'd just say check out the integraleyemovementtherapy.com website. Have a look at the articles on there. Have a look at the blog. There's a few videos, I believe, on there. Also have a look on YouTube, because there's a lot of people who've also put up their own stuff as well. It's a field that's growing. It's a field that's increasingly getting academic recognition.
Yes.
We're getting to the point now that we're the association for IEMT practitioners. We're not far off actually being in a position that we will have official governmental recognition. So we will be able to control the issuing of certificates. The reason this is quite important is a lot of the related fields, it's too late. These fields became very big very quickly. Once it's into the public domain, it can be very hard to, the genie's out the bottle. It's very hard to get it back in the bottle and control and regulate it. So the quality let's just say the quality of some of these related fields is slightly variable, to put it as politely as I can. The people in the association, we have worked very hard to maintain a standard. So when you go to an IEMT training, you're getting something of the quality and the standard it's supposed to be. And we're looking to actually take that even further.
Yeah.
Essentially, at the moment, we don't have a formal qualification. Yeah. Once we have the official recognition and then the license for qualification, we now have a qualification. Mm-hmm. And we're heading that way with the more research that's being done, the bits and pieces that are happening. We're not far off that now. Yeah. So exciting times ahead.
It certainly is. It certainly is. Thank you very much for your time on this wet Thursday. I think it's Thursday, wet Thursday morning. Thank you very much for your time, and I will certainly put the links, and I will speak to you soon. Thank you very much.
Take care.